What's up, guys? I want to go through a community property question. This is July 2010, question 6. It's a really good question because it forces you to deal with a large number of the important issues that if community property comes up on the bar coming up here, which it probably will, a bulk of what you're about to learn here will be on there because these are so fundamental. So what is this question testing? And then we'll go through it step by step. It's testing the disposition of 3 different pieces of property: a condo, a cabin, stock, and liability for an accident. And when you read this question, I won't read it for you because you should read it. When you read it, pay attention to why they laid it out the way they did. This is something you should understand as you're reading and practicing questions this week. Why do they set it up that way? Like, the wife got into an accident when she was having an affair, right, with some guy. What's this guy's name? Oscar. He probably was a winner, right? Whatever. Anyway, so she gets into an affair with him when they're married. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why? Because the tort happened while they were married, but he didn't get a judgment against her until after 2007 when they were separated. Why would they put that in there? Because they're trying to see if you know that a tort is only tort liability accrues at the time of the tort, not the time of the judgment. At the time of the tort, she was married to Harry, who, I don't know, he kind of got screwed here. Anyway, yes, I have to watch myself because this is video and it will go down in history, so I got to kind of hold back. Let's continue. The point of whether or not she was having an affair goes to whether or not she was acting for the benefit of the community. So I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but what I'm pointing to is, as you read these facts, start to picture the rules in your head and say, well, why did they do it that way? Why did it happen this year? Why did it happen in that year? Why was she having a romance? It's because they're always going to be sort of building a fact pattern inside of the framework of the rules. And in a way, your job is to unpackage that. Right? So I'm trying to tell you, look at patterns. Back to the main and fundamental learning point in studying a community property question is, what's the analytical structure? You always start off with the major rule. California is a community property state. All property acquired while married is community property. Property acquired before marriage or after marriage is separate property, or property acquired during marriage, which is by gift or inheritance, is separate property. Any property that is purchased with purely separate property remains separate property, and you can use tracing rules for that. The tracing rule will apply to any evolution of separate property, whether if it's from a bank account or not. You have to see sort of how it evolves, right? What is the structure? We look at source. When was the property acquired? Was it acquired during marriage or after? Okay. Well, that's important based on the rule we just talked about. With what? Was it acquired during marriage from separate property or inheritance, which has happened here? Yeah, then it's separate property. Was it acquired during marriage with community property? Yeah. Okay, well, there's the source. Very basic, and you want to learn it that way. Presumption. All community property will marry, blah, blah, blah. Various presumptions apply to different pieces of property. That's why you're going to have to read the outline and learn it. But the structure itself is always going to be the same. Source, presumption, actions, disposition. Actions. The major action that people take, or the major actions that people take, are how do they take title to real property? Right? Did they take it in their own personal form? Did they take title in joint form? And if they did, we're going to get into the Lucas rules. Agreements. Did they have an oral agreement that I'm going to give you this property, or did they have a written agreement? This is really important because oral agreements are only valid before 1985, but after 1985, it has to be written. Improvements. Well, improvements is important in a couple areas. Where people take title to land in joint form, improvements will be returned to the spouse on divorce, right? And again, we'll go through that. We'll go through each step. Improvements also applies to other cases where you have contribution to separate property business. That's the Van Camp-Correa analysis, which is a different question. But that's that structure. And then disposition. Always remember to finish with disposition. You have to tell the bar examiners what was the ultimate outcome of this piece of property. right? Everything you do on the bar, structure, 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 conclusion. Be complete. Show that you are a lawyer. Be complete. All right, let's dig into this question. So with these ideas in mind, we kind of look at each piece of property. The basic facts are these. So Harry doesn't work because he's a trust baby, which is good for him. That's cool. I'm a little jealous, but whatever. Wendy does work. She's a travel agent. The issue here is that Harry puts all his money from his trust into his own separate account. Ding, 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 ding. What is that? Well, is that money his? Does it matter that he put it in a separate account? What if he put it in a joint account? All right, so this is the first layer of issues. Secondly, Wanda puts all her money in her account. Well, this is interesting because she's kind of getting screwed in a way, depending on how you look at it. How come? She's actually earning money, and anything earned during marriage is community property. So even though she put her money in her bank account, it's still community property, even though the bank account's in her name. That's just a rule that you need to know. He put his money into a separate bank account, but his money was coming from an inheritance. So that separate property inheritance stayed his separate property in his separate account. Her community property income became community property in her separate account. Basic idea that you have to understand what's going on. So now they buy this condo, this vacation condo, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Harry pays the purchase price with his checking account, and then they orally agree to make it his property. Okay, big, fat, juicy analysis. This is probably the main one of this particular test. So let's walk through it. Source. When did they get the condo? They got it while they were married. With what money? They got it all from his money, all from his checking account. What's the presumption? Well, it would be all his, but they took title to it as joint. They took title as joint, basically as just, you already heard it, just go with me, all right? So you might say the presumption is that it's separate property because it's his stuff, and say, however, they took an action, see below, and then you go to actions, they took title as husband and wife as joint tenants. Sorry, I keep messing that up, but the point is that when they took title, it triggers these Lucas rules, right? And so to make the Lucas rules really simple, here's the bottom line. Lucas is basically saying this. Look, if you're married and you buy a piece of real property and you title it in both people's names, we're going to presume that the separate property became a gift to community property. So the house is community property. When does that apply? Lucas applies at death. That makes perfect sense. It looks like it was a gift to community property, so if the guy dies, they probably had a decent marriage. He probably wants her to have her share of community property, so Lucas applies. This jointly held property is community property at death. But wait a second, what if these people get a divorce? Oh my God, I hate her, I hate him, I don't want her having my stuff. So what happens anti-Lucas? At divorce, it doesn't mean that taking title turned it into purely community property. It mostly did, but there's a noise. Anyway, it mostly did, but what happens in anti-Lucas is on divorce, the person who purchased it with separate property here, Harry, using his inheritance, he would get improvements, he would get any down payment back, any improvements, and any principal paid. So if the condo was worth, they bought it at $500,000, and it's worth $1 million. Let's say he paid in $250,000 down payment. He would get that $250,000 back, whatever improvements he put in, and any principal payments he'd get back. The remainder would then be community property. All right. So that's how that action changed it. Now, they also agreed that they would make the house his, but they did it orally. And so now the question becomes, can you explain to the bar examiner you understand transmutation? You would say something like, here, state the rule, say prior to 1985, oral transmutations are okay. After 1985, it needs to be in writing, signed by the spouse whose interest is being negatively affected, which would be Harry. And say here, it was an oral agreement. This is after 1985 because the facts say we're in the 2000s, therefore it's invalid. So the action that controlled disposition was the way they took title. The agreement had no effect. On divorce, he's going to be able to get down payment, improvements, and principal. They'll split the rest as community property. that would then be disposition. See it over and over and over, no matter what the property is. So let's look at the cabin. This one was easy. How come? Because when did he buy the cabin? During marriage. With what money? With his separate property. How did he take, what's the presumption? It's his separate property because we trace the cabin back to his separate checking account that his separate inheritance, has his separate inheritance in it. What actions did they take? He put it in his own name. Did they have any agreements? No. Did they take title anyway differently? No. Did she make any improvements? No. Then it's his separate property. And I recommend using answer B on this because it's cleaner, it's better. Structure, structure, structure. Don't try to be fancy. Don't try to be smarter. Don't try to get an A. Get a B and pass the bar and get your license. Okay? Structure. That's a B. It's actually probably like a C+, but who cares? But you know what I'm saying? Like, just be like a machine head. Cabin is his. Let's move on to the stock. Now, this adds a wrinkle, and you're going to see that on the exam. They're always going to add a little something, but you'll be ready for it if you practice. The stock, when was it purchased? It was purchased while they were married. With what money? She used, I believe she used her money from her checking account. Yeah, from her savings account, $20,000. Now remember, that money is community property because of what we said before. So she's buying stock with community property. Now, she's buying stock. What could that raise? Well, she's going to make an investment. Could bring up this fiduciary, breach of fiduciary duty rule, the fiduciary duty of investing, which says if one of the spouse makes a grossly negligent or reckless investment, then he owes the other spouse, he's breached his fiduciary duty and owes the other spouse either damages or refund or whatever. Go back and review that rule. I'm not going to lie to you if I don't say something perfect, and I need to be straight. Okay, so review that rule. Now, how do you analyze that? Well, the facts say that she got an advertisement or something and she wanted to go buy this stock. She says to him, hey, should I buy it? He says, I don't think it's a good idea. Ding, ding, ding. Oh, does this mean it's a grossly reckless investment? Blah, blah, blah. Moving forward, she goes ahead and buys it, and I believe it doesn't say whether it went up or down, but the issue is whether or not it was risky, bioengineering company. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to say she bought it when she was married with community property funds. The presumption is that it's community property. However, you might also say here that there's a fiduciary duty, and if she purchases the stock in breach of fiduciary duty, then certain consequences follow. And again, read the example answer and flesh that out. All right? But think in terms of the flow of structure. I'm running out of time, so I'm going a little quick, but pay attention also to the way that investment worked was basically she had the power, the management ability to make the investment, but subject to that fiduciary duty. All right? That's how that structure goes. Sorry that wasn't a little cleaner. And so that deals with the stock. Now the liability, this is a little bit of a repeat back to what I started with the video. Liability for torts. Well, the liability begins when the tort happens. But the question is, if the tort is done for the benefit of the community, then it has an effect on the order of judgment of recovery. If it's not for the benefit of the community, then there's an alternative order. What am I saying? If a spouse is out doing their own thing, then a judgment creditor can go after that spouse's separate property first, then can go after the community property. All right? But if they're doing something for the benefit of the community, they get in a car accident, getting groceries, then the creditor can come after community property first, then the tortfeasor spouse's separate property. That makes perfect sense because the community is benefiting from the act, so the community pays. But if it's not for the benefit of the community, then that tortfeasor spouse is benefiting. Why should the community pay for it? And of course, the other person's separate property never pays because they weren't the tortfeasor spouse. So what happened here? Well, she was having an affair. That's probably not for the benefit of the community unless they're like swingers or something, which the facts didn't say that. And so therefore, it's her separate, not her separate debt, but her separate property will be affected first, and then community property. Now, to finish, because I'm running out of time, to finish, if you look at answer B at the very end, you'll notice how thorough this guy was, right? And nobody's perfect, but what I'm getting at is when the answer comes down to, the question comes down to, what property can this guy get?